Here with Chuck Weber on KCRG 9.2, Iowa Heartlanders head coach and general manager with us at First Intermission. And Chuck, the Heartlanders, before we talk a little bit more about this one, coming off a pretty nice victory 5 days ago last Sunday, overcame 3 different deficits. That's hard to do. What'd you think about the come-from-behind 6-4 win?
I thought the guys showed a lot of enthusiasm, a little spirit. We were able to capitalize on some opportunities. Special teams was big for us, basically getting 2 power play goals and then being able to hold them off in that situation. Was happy for Dante as well. He's been a guy that's been practicing hard all year and everything else, and for him to be able to get a win, it was a credit to the boys to be able to put up 6 goals.
And it's one of those things where you can see how much a goaltender matters to the guys sometimes just based off the reaction when the buzzer hit 0, and as soon as that final buzzer sounded, everyone is around Dante as quick as possible. It was his first win of the season. To see that kind of reaction, how does that make you feel knowing that you've held on to Dante this long throughout this process for him to be able to get his first win?
Well, yeah, and Dante's a great kid. He's a guy that, if he wasn't a great kid, he wouldn't be here right now. But just his willingness to stay on and work with the boys and continue to work on his craft. And he's a guy that hasn't had a lot of opportunity with the contracted goalies we have. And unfortunately, with Chase coming down, might not get many more opportunities. So, we'll see kind of how that plays out. Mercer's played a lot of hockey this year, so we'll see how it plays out here down the last 11 games.
And you mentioned Chase, which was going to be our next question, which is Chase Wutzke joining the Heartlanders. He's on an NHL deal. Minnesota Wild draft pick back only a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago at this point. He's 19 years old. He's coming out of the Western Hockey League. What else should we know about Chase Wutzke?
You know what? He's given his teams a chance to win. He got traded this year to a team that was supposed to make the playoffs, but unfortunately captain and leading scorer got hurt, which really kind of derailed that team's playoff run. He's a goalie. When you dig down into his stats, his expected goal differential is pretty good. He makes a lot of saves above expected. He's a guy that, pretty calm in the net, pretty easygoing kid. He's going to get a game at some point this weekend. We'll work through all that details. But we're excited to get him his first opportunity in pro hockey here.
Working with pretty much all excellent goaltenders this year. I know the wins and the losses haven't necessarily lined up exactly the way that we drew it up at the beginning of the year, but being able to have William Rousseau and Riley Mercer and now Chase Wutzke here, that commitment that Minnesota has shown the Heartlanders this year, particularly in net, what have you thought about it?
Well, it's been fantastic from that standpoint. Even at times, they've used us to try to get guys going, getting Sammy going before the Olympics, things like that. So, they've never at any point hung us out to dry, which some affiliates can do with their East Coast League team. And, credit to Matt Hendricks and their development staff. Bakker's done a great job with those guys. I think Merce and Roos would say, their season's been up and down a little bit, especially Roos compared to last year. Merce, went through some growing pains at different points, but you can see they both have bright futures.
Cincinnati, 3 straight games coming against the Cyclones. The last few, the Heartlanders kind of owe the Cyclones. The last one in particular, it was 3-0, and then all of a sudden the guys started getting going. That was about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago at this point. What's that mentality in the room about, hey, they've gotten the Heartlanders a few in a row, now it's time for us to respond at home?
Yeah, we've had a lot of close games with a lot of overtime games. It's been one of those situations where we've had some leads and then, some power plays laid against. Unfortunately, we've had some time or lack of time, maybe penalty kills, but also poor penalties at the wrong time, which have given Cincinnati some opportunities to get some points against us. We know they play with a lot of pace. There's a little bit of animosity there, going back to early in the season. I think for the most part, the games have been back and forth. The last one was 3-2. I hated our game last time in their building, and it was a 3-2 game. So from that standpoint, if we know we can come out, play with pace, play with a submergency, capitalize on some opportunities. You and I have talked about this down the stretch here. We just, except for Sunday, our expected goals hasn't been matching our output. So if we can get some finish, be a little more clinical with some of that stuff, it'll give us a good opportunity.
Chuck, thanks for a few. We always appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
Absolutely. That's Iowa Heartlanders head coach and general manager Chuck Weber. We'll be right back around the bend here as we continue our Iowa Heartlanders intermission report on KCRG 9.2.